John?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Francie?
I'm here.
David?
Here.
Carson?
Here.
And right now, Rachel, Kelly, and Rick are not present at this point. Thank you.
Great. And Kelly or is Rick out for the day, or is he coming late as well?
I'm not sure.
Okay, if either do show up, I'll just state for the record that they are here. All right. So and we're recording on GrassRoots.
Correct. Yep.
Cool. Well, welcome everybody to our, gosh, when is it? The 19th of May? Is it almost halfway through the year? APCHA meeting of 2021. We've got a longer agenda today, so thanks for bearing with us. And we'll start out with public comment. We do not have a sign-up list, but this is an opportunity for members of the public to share anything not on the agenda with the board and the community. So if you're on to public comment, please just unmute yourself, state your full name for the record, and we'd be happy to hear you. Just ask one more time, anyone out there in the public who has anything to say, this will be the time. Okay, hearing none, we will close the public comment section of this hearing and summarily move into executive session. So if you are watching, this is time to have a sip of water, stroll around the house, get a snack. We will be back with you in roughly 20 to 40 minutes, at which point today we will be discussing standards for sellers, recommended changes to our employee housing regulations, and we may have some comments from board members and staff as well. So how are we doing this switchover, Cindy?
Skippy, I think you have to have a motion to go into executive, don't you?
Right, that's all we need. And then we'll lock everybody out once we've gone into exec session.
Great. So John, is that a motion?
I will motion to move into executive session pursuant to CRS 24-6-4024B, conference with the authority's attorney for the purpose of receiving legal advice on the specific legal questions, and E, determining positions relative to matters that may be subject to negotiations, developing strategy for negotiations, and instructing negotiators. The specific items of the discussion involve APCHA versus Mulcahy 2015 CV30150, APCHA versus Mulcahy 2021 CV3000, and APCHA or Mulcahy versus APCHA 18 CV01918. Second that.
And a second from Carson, and I will also state for the record that Kelly has joined us. So she will be here for the meeting and the executive. Staff, would you please read the roll to go into executive?
Yes. Skippy?
Yes.
John?
Yep.
David?
Yes.
Carson?
Yes.
Kelly?
Yes, thank you.
We are in exec session. Have you stopped recording?
Mr. Chairman, I think you should specifically invite me if you wish me to.
transition works now.
We just need to get GrassRoots
What?
back up.
Okay, let's see if we get everyone back. It's at 5, so I want to make sure David has a chance to get back. Let's see, John's invisible, so that's cool.
I'm here, baby. Let's go.
All right. I'm just going to give it till 5 just so David has a chance to get back. There he is. All right. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you for bearing with us during our executive session. We're now going to get rolling on today's regularly scheduled agenda and kick it over to staff for updates from Diane or otherwise.
May I share my screen?
You sure may.
Great. Coming up. Two topics for today. The first one, I'll just do a verbal on. As you may have heard, Skippy heard, and some of you may have heard at the City Council meeting, the City Council will begin in-person meetings starting on June 1st. I had a meeting today, and I'm working with Alyssa Farrell, who's Administrative Services Director, on writing a memo to board chairs and to staff about guidelines and protocols for meeting in person. And it's basically a board chair's choice. You know, Skippy always checks in with the board to see preferences. Because of the, so while that's possible June 1st, I would recommend that the APCHA board, if you want to meet in person, that you look at kind of the beginning of July for that rather than June, simply because we're going to be figuring out mechanics in June, and we're going to be moving to Trescott. So it would be just an extra heavy lift for staff, as well as you'll need to make a decision on hybrid meetings. And I anticipate that you may want to have hybrid meetings, even if you don't want to have in-person meetings initially. At some point, you may want to have a hybrid meeting, and there are quite a few logistics, both technical as well as just a physical, what happens in the room and how do you make sure you don't have feedback and all those points. Part of the request to wait until July 1st is it'd be nice if a lot of other folks went through that pain before we did. But that's just a recommendation. The board can discuss that if you'd like it during board comments. But I just wanted to put that out there and let you know that's on the horizon. The second thing is Executive Director for APCHA. We received an updated packet today. I believe we've got 7 applicants. The interview panel will be reviewing those next week, and then interviews are scheduled for the 7th and 8th of June, and then final round interviews for the end of June. And happy to answer any questions on any of those.
Let's take questions first, then I'm going to just circle back with the board with a real brief check-in on meetings. Kelly?
I guess not really a question, but I'm happy to, you know, talk with you, Diane, about how we've sort of dealt with the technical concerns of a mixed in-person and virtual that we've been doing for the BOCC for forever, practically, and just some of the tips I've learned as chair, because we run them from downstairs, which is where they're broadcasting the meeting from anyway. So happy to talk offline about that.
Thank you, Kelly, for that offer, because that's going to be right. Is having those who have experience is what's going to work on this. Thank you,
Kelly. If we move in that direction of hybrid or option for hybrid, I would love to be included in that as well and take all advice. Yeah, sweet. Any other? I don't see other questions. I guess mine would be. I'm eager to get back to in-person everything. I'm perfectly comfortable giving the slack to staff who has a move going on and looking at July rather than June 1st. Is there anyone who has a problem with that or has a different opinion on that?
Skippy, I think it's a great idea to get back. I do think we should do hybrid meetings though, because I like the accessibility that Zoom has given everybody to dial in, make their public comment, view, watch, whatever, that probably didn't have before COVID. So
cool. Great. Well, it sounds like then July 1 as a good date, Diane. And is there anyone else who has a problem with hybrid as well? I mean, I'm good to try it. I have some fears on how it could go, but I'm happy to use the laboratory because there's definitely some advantages as well, and we can, you know, take it from what emerges. All right, Diane, you got some immediate feedback there.
Thank you, Skippy. And I think so that would put the first meeting at the July 7th, and maybe we can invite Kelly to one of our prep meetings and see if she's available for that. We have a good place to cover that, so we're all in the room and all hearing that.
Let's do that. Yeah, if you could figure out the best timing on that, that sounds perfect.
Great, thank you.
Awesome. Anything else? No? Okay.
Skippy, sorry, Francie had a question.
I'm sorry, Francie. Sorry, I see your hand now.
It's kind of a stupid question, but I've only been on since Zoom, so where do you meet?
Historically, BOCC.
And that is the...
Oh, right. You've really only been on since downtown Aspen in the county building. There is
Our chambers, Francie.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
Oh my God, that's so funny. This is like, yeah, okay.
Francie, I've never met the APCHA board in person and only met some of the folks face to face, so I'm with you.
All right, yes. It's a little confusing. Two different worlds.
I'll send you a pin and I can walk it with you. Yeah. All right, we'll move on from Executive Director's comments and move into the consent calendar, which is just the minutes of May 5th, 2021. And I would take either a motion for approval or any request for changes or corrections. Anybody?
I'll motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
All right, so we have a motion and a second from Kelly. Staff, would you please read the roll?
And thank you for making that motion. Skippy,
Yes.
David,
You're on mute.
Yes.
Carson,
Yes.
Kelly,
Yes.
John.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Okay, we'll move on from the consent calendar to our next agenda item, which is recommended changes to the APCHA employee housing regulation. And I will turn it over to staff to lead this conversation. And thank you guys so much for bringing all of this stuff forward.
Thank you. So what we're going to try to do over the next few meetings is, when there is time, is try to slide in some of the regulation changes that we've been proposing and talking about, and bringing them to you in small bits. So I'm going to have Maddie jump to page 27. So I'm going to have her show the regulations, and I will walk us through, and Maddie, it's page 27 of the regulations, so probably 35-ish, I think, of the packet, if my math is correct. So the few changes that staff is recommending right now is a change to the transfer outside the bid process. So right now we allow our units, our ownership units, to be transferred either to a spouse, child, or sibling. And you don't have to meet the category, you don't have to meet occupancy. It's just if you would like to transfer it to a child, as long as the child is, or a sibling, as long as they are a Pitkin County employee, we allow the transfer to move forward. Staff has seen a few properties recently, 4 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms being transferred to one individual. We've also seen sometimes transfers where it's dropping to a child and that child's significant other. And so APCHA staff is recommending to tighten that up. And so there are 2 sections to this. One is sometimes the original owner is remaining on the deed and a child is being added. And so in that situation, the child, if a child or a spouse is being added, they don't have to meet the income or asset requirements for that, that category for that unit. APCHA does require proof of marriage if a spouse is being added. And they do have to be employed in Pitkin County. We can cross out the 10 years that's in there right now and put in 4 years, because the board is at 4 years right now. So sorry, this is piecemealed from when we were talking about a 10-year work requirement before retirement, which we have not fully talked about with you all. And then the final part is that a new deed restriction has to be placed on the property at signing. And there's a $1,000 transfer fee. Right now, the transfer fee is $100 for staff to prepare all the new transfer documents. And so we're recommending that be increased to $1,000. Not a 2% sales fee like a normal sales transaction, but recognizing that this is outside the lottery process. And so staff does still add significant time. So that's part one. Part two is transferring to a child, sibling, or parent when you remove the owner from the deed. So the original owner is no longer an owner, and we're just adding a new owner. And in this case, APCHA staff is recommending that the qualifying child meet the minimum occupancy requirements -1, and that they do meet the category for the unit, both for income and assets. So that is a change from current policy. Current policy does not have an occupancy requirement or any requirement as to meeting income or assets for that unit. That the same kind of other pieces that we talked about before, a transfer fee is what we would like to do $1,000. We can also talk about fees later, and the qualified buyer has to enter into a new deed restriction during the transfer process. Same as always, the last section, Maddie, if you just scroll down slightly, transfers outside the immediate family are not allowed. That's same language as current, but we just wanted to tighten it all up and add it in new. And any other change in ownership interest must be approved by the APCHA hearing officer, if not under a court order. So I'm happy. I see Kelly's hand, so I will take Kelly's question, and then anyone that can't find hands can jump in afterwards.
Yeah, I just want to think through this sort of functionally. So you have an owner, they're still required every 2 years to submit their requalification, compliance, paperwork. They want to add spouse, sibling, or child, sibling, parent to the deed. So they would be required to continue their compliance paperwork every 2 years, but the other people on the deed would not. Is that correct?
No, so if someone else is added, then they would need to start complying as well. So if they were to add a child, the whole house would have to fill out the compliance paperwork every 2 years. So the original owner would have to maintain compliance with the employment, as well as residency and not owning other property. And then whoever was added to the deed is bound by those same restrictions and rules. So.
Okay. And so then with the other situation, you would expect proof of that compliance up front if the deed was being put in their name, rather than having whatever that lapse of time is for until the 2-year requalification comes up.
Yeah, so right now, if someone is trying to add someone, they submit a qualification packet, just like anyone else that's interested in getting in the program. And so we confirm that they don't own other property and employment pieces, and then we either qualify them or not qualify them to allow them to get on. The other pieces, Cindy does a great job at checking the Pitkin County Assessor's records as to what changes in ownership have occurred in the past, I think, week or two, and she always checks those to make sure we haven't missed anyone that hasn't come into the office and added someone without our knowledge, and we always reach out to them and either require them to change if the person they added has not met the qualifications, or we qualify retroactively. Any other questions? Skippy, I see you might be raising your hand.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I'm understanding the proposal correctly. So in some instances, well, I should say, in the instance where they're replacing the owner, they have to be qualified currently in the same category,
but if they're simply being added, they do not. That in either case, they cannot own property in the OEZ, and in both cases, they need to meet the minimum 4 years work requirement. Am I understanding that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I guess my initial reaction is that like the new occupancy requirements make sense, the nothing in the OEZ makes sense, and the work history makes sense. The only thing on the work history is like if someone's under 22, right? So if you have a kid and they're still in school, I'm not sure if we should think about that requirement starting at a certain age. I put that forth for discussion. And then on the category thing, I'm not sure how much sense that makes to me. I'd like to kind of talk through that. You know, if the existing property owner is category 3, but their kid is category 4, do they have to go quit their job and get a worse job to have the place? Or if they're less able, if they're category 2, you know, are they just out of luck? I'm not sure that makes sense. I think what I imagine what we're trying to achieve is just making sure that if there's continuity of family, they have the opportunity to stay in the community if they're a qualified worker and if they're using the space. And so I'm wondering if a more constructive way to do that is that, you know, whatever the upper category is, category 5, right? As long as they're under that income and asset cap, they would be eligible for the transfer. But if they're over, then they just wouldn't be eligible at all because they've got enough to do this on their own. So I just kind of want to throw those out there for a conversation, but the rest all makes a lot of sense to me.
So Skippy, I'll respond quickly to the, you know, age 22. We look at, and I know this is a point I think Kelly might have brought up, and it's a future discussion topic for sure, that if you have attended school in Pitkin County, high school, for example, we allow you to count that towards your work history to get you to that 4-year kind of requirement. So we certainly look at that. And then the second piece is if the board's amenable to that, then certainly we are too. I think the intention is the same, that we are wanting to make sure these units are staying for folks that need them.
Yeah. Okay. That totally clears up the 22 thing for me, and I just, put that other piece to the board for discussion, but everything else looks great. I'm not calling on people, by the way. You're leading this guy. Maybe raise a digital hand if you're in agreement, or speak up if you disagree.
I guess I'll jump in here. You know, it is. I see sort of 3 things here. So, adding someone to the deed, the original person on the deed still retains ownership and responsibility. You know, so their category is their category that they qualified for and remain in, whether they continue to earn above that or not. Blah blah blah. Then adding, you know, exchanging someone's category, you know, or I guess transferring ownership is something different. I look at that almost similarly to how we might treat an inheritance. So I think it would be helpful to understand, you know, what do we do in the case of an inheritance? You know, is that person if they, you know, you could expect your parents maybe bought something at a category 4 or 5, they were later in life, they had more earning potential, blah, 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 and you're only at a category 2 because you're earlier in your career, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. That, you know, how do we deal with that in the case of an inheritance where someone's inheriting a unit that they can't then qualify to keep? Are they required to sell it? That's how I would think similarly about a transfer of ownership to particularly a child or a spouse in that case.
So currently, Maddie, it's on page 41 of the regulations. If if there is a death of a qualified employee, the qualified spouse and or child in occupancy at the time of the qualified owner's death does not have to meet the category for the unit or the minimum occupancy, but they, they do have to, they have a 6-month period to become qualified. So let's say, unfortunately someone dies on June 1st, the spouse might not be working because for whatever reason, they have 6 months. It's a 1-bedroom. They have 6 months to come back into compliance and prove to APCHA they're working to maintain that unit. And then if in the unfortunate situation that it's a dependent that's left alone, we allow them to stay in the house and have a caregiver stay in the house as well, to allow them to get through high school and a higher education program and to maintain that consistency for that child.
Bethany, if they're not working, they've got 6 months. Do they have 6 months to prove that they're working or prove that they're working within that category income requirement?
Just to prove that they're working. They don't have to meet the category or income in this situation.
So if you have a non-dependent child, can they inherit the unit?
A non-dependent, so...
Well, or I guess a
not,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so right now it's tied to in occupancy. It's not tied to someone else, so they have to be in occupancy.
Okay.
Well, real quick, sorry to complicate this. What does that mean if let's say they're a college student? So they're off at college, come back in the summers or whatever. What would they be considered at that point?
Right now, this provision specifically says a dependent minor under age 18. Certainly, this is up for discussion as well. If we'd like to look at changing that to under age 24, for example. Part B, this isn't a first, this is just a review, and then we'll bring it back for first reading. So this could be changed as well.
Got it.
Then what I'm hearing is sort of, if your mom, if the parent transferred it to the child prior to death, they could stay in the unit and own the unit and be on the deed in the unit. But if your child's 25 and your parent had not transferred the ownership to you prior to death, then the unit would go into the lottery process.
Correct.
Thank you for that clarification.
And we currently have these two different, the lottery or transfers outside the bid process right now. So we're currently operating under that, and we see a fair number of transfers. And so it's just kind of tightening up that transfer a little bit.
Got it. So Bethany, just to make it precise, my suggestion here would be to keep what we have, but rather than requiring the transferee, who's a family member, to meet the income, the exact category, it would be treated as it is in death, that they have to be a qualified worker and that they have to be, under the maximum income and asset limit for an APCHA unit. So for whatever that is, a category 5, and as long as they can do that and the work history and nothing in the OEZ, then they could do that, but they wouldn't then, be out of luck if they're a few dollars over or under their category. That's my suggestion.
Okay, we can make that and bring that back for possibly first reading, depending on where we get with the rest of them. So. Okay, if no one else has any comments, then we can go to the next topic. And sorry, let me get to it. So it's, Maddie, if you want to go to page 36 of the APCHA regulations. So this is APCHA staff has placed into this document an inspection clause. This is going to be discussed at first reading on the June 2nd, 2021 meeting. So this is really just a placeholder. It's not meant for discussion tonight, and I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware of that. We are going to put a clarifying definition of an inspection and what that actually means before the June 2nd meeting, but I'm happy to answer any quick questions on this, but if not, we'll talk about it then.
Just thank you to the board. I wasn't here, obviously, and I just think this is great that we're getting rolling, and I just really commend all of you on saying, like, let's dive in and do this. I think it's awesome.
So, Maddie, if you can jump to page 46 of the APCHA regulations, please. The next addition APCHA is recommending is under the owner roommate rental policy. So we're suggesting adding owners are permitted to allow a significant other to move in with them who might not otherwise qualify due to employment. They must still complete a qualification packet, and they cannot own other property in the ownership exclusion zone. So we see requests often from owners whose significant others might work in Glenwood or Carbondale, but they would like them to move in, and they would like APCHA staff to at least be aware. And currently, APCHA requires that if you're charging a roommate or rent, or they're paying any sort of household expenses, they need to be qualified. And we have seen a fair number of people that say, hey, my significant other works down Valley and they don't qualify. So this is a way for them to be in compliance with the APCHA regulations and us to know who's in the unit, in a sense. Kelly.
I wonder if it's useful to cross-reference here to say that you can't rent to somebody on the ineligible list, on APCHA's ineligibility list.
Yes, we can. There's no other questions on this. We'll go to the next one, page 47. Maddie, you're not going far.
Hey, real quick.
Yeah.
I'm just reading that, and I think that, I don't know, it feels a little big brotherish to me, and I think it's right for just non-compliance. You know, boyfriend, girlfriend moves in, lives with you, they're back and forth. Maybe they've got an apartment in Basalt, maybe they got a house in Glenwood, something. I don't know. I think I get the thought of it. I just kind of wonder if we're setting ourselves up for people that'll just not comply, just not report, not do anything, and you won't find out who's living in the units. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I completely understand. I think what we've found is we've had a lot of owners reach out asking, you know, hey, so-and-so, I'd like them to move in, but they don't qualify because they work somewhere else, and they are paying part of household expenses. And so it's more of a way, certainly, to allow in the regulations some room for that situation to occur. But you're right, it could be right for people not telling us, and I think what's happening right now is people aren't telling us too, because they know they don't qualify.
Okay. So, I mean, this is just dealing with working down Valley instead of what, in Pitkin County?
Basically, Glenwood, Carbondale, or possibly a remote employee outside of the Valley even.
Okay. Okay.
John, are you okay with that, or are you suggesting we strike it? I just want to make sure we're.
No, I do feel it's like setting some of this stuff, it's unintended consequences or more work almost, some of it, but I'm fine with it.
Can I just clarify something? The problem here isn't that someone's staying with them. The problem, the concern is that they're receiving money for it.
Right.
Right? Like, that's what we're clarifying here. I mean, you can, your mom can come stay with you for 3 months, but, if you start accepting money as that, then you start to get into that situation of like, well, what is the money for? So that's what I see as this clarifying.
Or you have a home in the OEZ you've been living in, you meet someone, you're like, oh, I could go live with them and Airbnb it, which is totally not within the intent of the program.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. And just so we have clarity as well, I think this is implied, but for everyone watching, and if anyone's not making a comment, then like that's an agreement with the change. Just so we're all aligned going into the beginning.
I'm going to ask Scott if we can go to 7 because I forgot about this. Is that okay? Do you want to do the beer now while I'm listening
Phyllis, I'm not muted.
Oh.
But we encourage you. Keep going, Beth.
Love to do a beer though, Phyllis.
The next one is APCHA staff is recommending 2 additions to the leave of absence policy. The first, from a clarity standpoint, is leave of absences can only be requested after owning a unit for 24 months, and they must be requested in advance. Currently, they're supposed to be requested in advance, but the real change is providing clarification that there's a 2-year waiting period. We have seen, not a ton, but sometimes an owner comes in and then 6 months later they want to go try out Mexico or Hawaii for a year. And the intent is really to allow someone, yes, to grow a career or try something else out or seek treatment or take care of a loved one. But the goal is that you at least lived in your unit for 24 months. And then the next one is an owner is allowed to be on a leave of absence for at most 24 months during a 10-year period. There is not currently a 10-year period in the regulations. So currently the regulations just say an owner is allowed to be on a leave of absence for at most 24 months. We have certainly seen in some of our longer term owners the need for a second leave of absence. Either they've taken one to care for a ailing parent, and then a period of years later, they need to go either to lower elevation for a certain reason or some other life reason. And so what staff is recommending is every 10 years, someone would be eligible for 24 months. It wouldn't mean that year 9, 10, 11, and 12, they could be on a 4-year in a row leave of absence. It would very much be in a 10-year period, you could have a 24-month leave of absence. And the same rules apply, that you get 12 months to start and then you have to reapply for your second 12 months. You need to be in good standing with your HOA and really show a strong reasoning that you're going to be returning to Aspen. And so I'm open to comments or questions or any thoughts on both of those provisions.
I have a question. Is our inventory is getting older and ostensibly some people are living in them for longer durations? Are you seeing more requests for leave?
We've seen an interesting group of requests in the past probably 18 months. Some have been to take children to schools that might have been in session full-time before the Aspen School District went back full-time. We've seen some that are were out of work here, and so they tried to find a job elsewhere. And then we always see a handful that are seeking either medical treatment or, trying another place out near grandchildren to see if it's a move that they would like to make. There's certainly a fair number that at the 24-month mark, they list their unit for sale. But it just really depends on the reasoning that they have gone. We've also seen a ton that have gone for schooling and then returned and used that schooling to benefit their career in Aspen. So it's a mixed bag.
Are people renting out their units while they're gone?
So we encourage rental of units, yes, and most people rent out their units. There's very few that come through that don't do a rental of a unit. The owners that are in a retirement that can take 6 months a year, and that's slightly different, but the owners that are allowed 6 months a year to be gone that have reached retirement age, they have to rent out their unit if they're gone for that 6 month period, which is great because most of them are gone for the winter season, and that means that some employees are getting in. But very rarely does an owner choose not to rent out their unit. It's almost few and far between because they can recoup their costs. So. Carson?
Yeah, so just on the leave of absence after owning a unit for 24 months. So I guess maybe help me with that one. I mean, I guess I'm just looking at that. I mean, anybody that's bought a unit has been here for at least 4 years, and so somebody buys a unit, and parents get sick in the first 2 years, and then they may have put in for a long time, and then we don't allow them to take a leave for the first 2 years, basically. So I guess we're seeing a lot. I just want to understand. I guess I just don't really see the benefit in that. So you're seeing a lot of people that are winning properties, and then immediately upon winning the property, they're saying, I want to leave of absence?
Maybe not immediately, but we've seen at least one in the past year that was about 6 months after, and they wanted to go try out something on the Front Range. And so currently there's nothing to really deny that request besides them, stating that they're going to return to Aspen. But I completely see your point, Carson, as well, and the idea that if there is a reason that they have to go, and so we can certainly look at changing kind of the writing of this one where it's a little bit tighter of reasoning, or APCHA gives it a little bit more thought before approving the request, and looking at it that way.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, if you put it's for health reasons or for caring for a family, I mean, that's what you're going to get when they apply for it. So.
Noted.
Thank you.
Skippy, I see your hand up.
Yeah, sorry, I'm still hosting, so I don't have a digital hand, ironically, because I love them. So I've got a little bit of heartburn on these ones, not because I don't agree with the intent, but as Carson mentioned, I get why we would say the first 24 months, but honestly, one request in the last year during COVID when everyone had the opportunity to go work, not everyone, a lot of people had the opportunity to take their Pitkin County job and go work from the beach in Mexico, suggests it may be a solution looking for a problem. And like you said, you could be winning or in the lottery for, 10 years, you win and you want to go to grad school and you can't. So I'm not so sure that's necessary, although I would say perhaps a way to get the intent of having someone living there after it's new would be within a certain period, be it 24 months or otherwise, requiring rental of it while they're gone. I don't know if that's something that's been thought about, but that pops to mind as a possible bridging the gap solution. And then separately on I understand why we're limiting it within the 10-year period. I'm concerned that we have half of our owners in a age cohort where, you know, their parents are probably, you know, one side or the other of 10 years of passing away and needing help. And it's pretty common for one parent to get sick and then the other parent to get sick. So I just see this as something that's going to happen more and more out of necessity. And so, yeah, the intent makes sense, but, and I know I suggested before, asked the question of, can we just specify what this would be okay for, right? And the response from staff was, well, that's going to take a lot more time in qualifying, and I hear that, and maybe it's more than I think. But I just wonder if the cleaner way to do this is to specify for what things you could get an exception to this. And yeah, maybe some people will abuse it, but if mom's in Cleveland, like, you can't go to Mexico to take care of her. And I just see more of these requests being necessary by virtue of the aging population in our housing. And like, maybe this is exactly the wrong time for this restriction. And, you know, I don't feel super strongly about either of these, but I do see those as concerns that I want to raise for consideration.
So just to quickly respond to that, right now, you're only allowed one leave of absence that's 24 years in your entire course of ownership. So this is actually allowing a little bit more flexibility. Yes, there's a 10-year mark on it, but this is allowing it. And the board historically, I think it was the previous APCHA board, it's not the currently SAP board, but held to 24 months even for medical treatments that allowed the individual not to come back. This is a different board, so it's a different discussion, but certainly deed restrictions, and Cindy can speak to this if I'm saying something wrong, but even our very old deed restrictions all have the 24-month provision in it and don't allow for anything else. And so it's certainly something that we can change moving forward and add definitely some rental provisions in there as well, but just to clarify that point.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, I just throw it back to everyone for discussion, right? Like, I don't want to be in a position of telling someone they can't go care for their dying mother because they just cared for their dying father. And I want to make sure that our system is doing what it was intended to do, which is house workers. So maybe there's a rental requirement there. I'm just putting it out there because that's my concern.
Kelly?
So I just want to understand, when someone gets a leave of absence and then they run into their requalification period, do you just sort of, so if they've received a 12-month leave of absence, you just don't look at those 12 months for employment record? Okay.
They get a waiver of employment and residency for that period of time.
Okay.
It is a waiver, yes.
So then it's sort of this, I could see some unintended consequences if there's not a time limitation put on it, particularly for folks who want to retire. And we've had this other conversation about how, you know, holding to sort of the Social Security retirement age related to employment. So now, you know, you have a person who maybe could have different reasons to not work for 5 years and essentially retire early in their unit. You know, so there's just little end runs that end up being unintended consequences of this. So I think that it does make sense to have, you know, some limitation to that, unless we want to just crack open the conversation and say, you don't need to work here once you own it, and as long as you rent it out or something, which I'm not sure this board is intending to do. So, you know, I think there should be that limitation on how much time you can accrue not working in the community and not being retired for a leave of absence. And but I do honor Carson's comments of, you know, it's hard. You could have already been working in this community for a really long time, and suddenly you win, and then something awful happens in your life, or something changes major, or you go and get accepted to grad school or something. So I don't think we need to have that restriction on your first 24 months of ownership, but I do think there needs to be that 24-month restriction for your total ownership, or for the 10-year term.
Great, and Skippy, maybe you can help me out. I think I've heard two different thought processes, and so maybe just providing me clarification moving forward. One is that leave of absences, if they're requested in the first 24 months, there might have to be a rental requirement, and one is just scrapping that entirely. So I don't know if if you feel that there's agreement one way or the other, and just let me know.
I mean, hearing Kelly and Carson saying just scrap it, I'm fine with that. If people have a different opinion, let me know. Yeah, I'm not holding anything up over either of these. I just wanted to air those concerns and kind of let the conversation flow.
Taking that feedback, we will scrap the first, and we'll keep the second, and move it towards the first reading at some point. So the last,
Hey, you guys. Sorry to interrupt you, Bethany. I've got to pick up my kid at the school. He's getting off his ex-ed trip, but I think you still have enough people for our meeting. Am I correct? I think you got David and Carson, so you should have enough, don't you? Am I right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and if you could open with, we're still good.
So sorry to bugger out.
That's fine. Let's do all the stuff that we hid from John now. Okay. See you, brother.
So the last one's on page 54 of, oh, Maddie's already there. She was, there we go. So it's a quick addition of a maximum sales price for a compliance forced sale. Maximum sales price will be lowered by 10% in compliance cases every 6 months if a unit doesn't sell. This one really hits the Aspen Village, for example. We had a compliance case back in, I think it was 2018. Cindy might correct me if I'm wrong. We've had a few others as well, but the owner was forced to sell their unit. They listed it for a incredibly high price and ended up keeping it for about 16, 18 months longer than the board had required them to sell it because they were trying to get such a high price for it. And so when a unit that's being listed through APCHA goes on the market, if it hasn't been sold in 6 months, we reduce the price every 6 months. And so this is bringing it into like the Aspen Villages, et cetera, and others that aren't required to sell through APCHA. We had a similar situation out at the North 40 this past year, just listing it for higher than it was worth, and not reducing it when they had no action because they could just stay in it.
Great.
Kelly.
Help me understand why those operate outside the APCHA lottery.
So the deed restriction doesn't require them to be sold through APCHA, and so they can be sold by the owner or a real estate agent. And so this one, it was owner sold, owner listed, and they chose what they wanted to list it for.
Mm-hmm.
And it would have taken APCHA
to comply with APCHA's rules, but they're not required to use APCHA as the selling broker. Yeah, I support this. Thanks.
Can I ask a clarifying question on what Kelly just said, not so much on this? Because this comes up all the time with RO units being kind of sold without anyone knowing about it. And I recognize that they don't have to go through a lottery, that they set their own price. But can we just require or at least encourage people to put their listings on the APCHA page, so at least people who are looking for a unit know that it's for sale, which should behoove or help the owner attract maximum sales price that is not capped?
Yeah, it's something APCHA can look at doing. There is a couple reasons why it's not usually done. One, it's not usually sold by an owner. It's sold by a licensed broker. So it's a real estate agent, whether it's from Douglas Elliman or Sotheby's or some firm in the area. And we are basically assisting in that process when we list it. It can be listed on APCHA.org. It can't be listed on HomeTrack as easily as an available unit, but we can certainly look at tweaking that process in the future because it's not a unit that would be bid on or would go to lottery. But it's certainly something we can do. I know that a tiny home in the Phillips Mobile Park got posted today on our website. So I know that there are some that end up on our website, but not all of them do. You're right, Skippy.
Yeah, I mean, there's an email list for every broker in town, right? I mean, even just sending them an email being like, hey, if you're listing RO properties, we have reason to believe, in fact, we know that there are some people looking for RO properties here that may miss this, like, just list it with us.
And Skippy, a lot of times the seller already knows somebody who wants to buy it, or they've never even thought of selling it until somebody knocks on their door and says, I'd really like to buy your place, can I go ahead and try to qualify and buy it? So that happens a lot of times too. We had an RO up at Williams Ranch where they had already picked the buyers for it. So
yeah, I know that happens a lot.
Most of the time.
Yeah, I know that happens a lot. I hear those stories too. It's just if we could communicate to those owners when that happens, there's a good chance you get more money if you let more people know, even if it's for weeks, you know, whatever.
In most cases, they're capped, so they can't get more. It's capped of what they can get. It's only like in Aspen Village, Lazy Glen, that it's not capped. But like in the North 40, Williams Ranch, most of the ROs do have some type of a cap to them.
All right. Thank you. Sorry for derailing us.
Don't apologize. All good discussion. So my direction will be to make the changes and to hopefully bring back for a first reading everything at the June 2nd meeting. Unless I missed something, that's my plan.
Sounds like a good one with no one speaking up. Beautiful. Thank you, Bethany. So just for the public, we're going to move on from these recommended changes into our discussion of standards for sellers. This is a discussion about making sure that moving forward, all units that are lotteried and sold within the APCHA system are handed over in a safe, livable, and proper manner, and that people are not saddled with, you know, winning a lottery and then finding themselves in a defunct unit, which does happen, and also people get really beautifully maintained units, but we need to correct for the problem. So this discussion will continue today, and it's just awesome that this board has taken this on and made a statement that that's not acceptable to us, and we want to find a solution to make sure it doesn't happen. Staff will lead this discussion, as I understand it.
Diane will be leading the discussion, and here she comes.
Sorry, the mute buttons and everything else, and just trying to clear my screen. So just making sure I knew when the BOCC meetings were so I didn't schedule over it. Let's see, let me just share my screen. And I'll take this down so the board can have a discussion. But to start with, the hardest part of this whole discussion about creating a capital improvements program, honestly, I was surprised and impressed how quickly the board moved through getting to the requiring the home inspection and also the creating a new deed restriction that may be an incentive to some folks. So really kind of getting down to the nut of it. I wanted to pose these 3 policy questions because they're kind of, depending on how you answer this, it may be a barrier to moving forward on this topic until we get more data. So these are also in your packet. So I'll go ahead and stop the share. And just ask that question of the first one being, do you think you can answer the question of who pays prior to knowing some more about what are we seeing? What are the level of improvements needed? And this gets to Rachel's question, right? She keeps asking for examples, but that's hard to do if we don't really kind of have them to go through. So there could be some argument for, you know, Cindy's working on the RFQ. We plan on implementing the home inspection program within a couple months. But are we really at the point where the board feels comfortable answering the who pays question? And feel free to take, you know, these questions are obviously related, so feel free to take these independently or together, however you so choose. And with that, I'll hand it back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Great. Well, I guess I wasn't at the last couple of meetings, so I'm feeling a little catch up on the conversation. So I guess I'll just ask first for questions of the board to staff, and then we'll circle back on discussing the individual ones. So I would ask for questions first.
And sorry, Skippy, I forgot. I'm facilitating this section. So sorry.
That's my expectation.
Sorry about that. So what Skippy said.
I can do it if you need, but I was planning for you to do it because I am a little behind.
Can you leave the 3 questions up, Diane? Thank you.
Okay, if no one else has questions, I have one question, Diane, and the answer is yes, I do think I can answer personally, number one. But you provided a table with the varying options, which I so appreciate. Yep, that's the one. Pros, cons, like this is an awesome matrix to help us make a decision. Thank you to everyone on staff who did this. The hybrid program, can you please explain this to me, to the 0.5% per year? I don't clearly understand it from the slides. Can you explain that to me? I don't know if you're on mute.
You're on mute, Diane.
Don't know how that happened. Unless there's an outside funding source, I think this is probably the best option. And let me just focus on that first cell that that explains here. And what it is that if you want the seller to pay, we also don't want sellers to quote unquote lose their shirt, right? We don't want them to go upside down on a house. That just seems intrinsically unfair. So the notion here would be the other kind of underlying concept on this one is there are lots of sellers who do keep up on the maintenance of their house. So if option B, buyer pays all, then you're actually penalizing, you're sort of penalizing people who've kept up with their stuff, and you're rewarding people who haven't kept up with their property. So this particular version says, we're going to hold the seller responsible for capital improvements, but we don't want to go below a certain level. And that level what's proposed here is that level is their purchase price plus 0.5% per year that they've owned the home, a 0.5% appreciation. So let's say you've got a deed restriction that is a 2.5% deed restriction. You're basically taking that 2% a year and putting it towards the improvements on the house. So you're capping the maximum resale value and then using some of that appreciation to do the improvements. And then you would step forward and say, if for some reason these improvements exceed that bucket of money that's created by taking that part of the majority of the appreciation and putting it to the capital improvements, if there's not enough money, then at that point you would say, and remember, this is why Cindy suggested doing this at the point of listing. We'd add to the purchase price that amount of money. Basically, when that money gets paid, put it in escrow and require the seller to do the upgrades within the first year. And APCHA would then let them use those funds to do that.
Got it. So you're not saying that an owner, because if we're even dealing with this, right, the owner hasn't kept up their unit. So we're not saying that for that owner who hasn't kept up their unit, we're going to reward them more and more based on the number of years that they have, frankly, done a bad job of keeping up their unit. What you're saying is we're going to apply that appreciation towards the buyer and use that as a piggy bank to do the work, but it won't actually be captured by the seller. Is that accurate?
Yep.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I do think it's important that the seller, right, the seller's not getting they're still getting some appreciation, but not very much. Thank you.
Okay.
I think Francie had a question. I'll call her. Francie, please.
Hi. I'm wondering if the home inspection program could avert some of these last-minute decisions when it comes to sale. If we could do more timely home inspections, maybe every few years or something, so that we're not getting to the point of sale with a unit that's been degraded significantly. And so after 5 years, maybe they have to have a home inspection and we find that there's mold in the basement or there's a leak somewhere that's making the sheetrock disintegrate, I don't know, whatever. But then at that time, we could, I don't know if insist is the right word, but we could facilitate, encourage, whatever it would be, the fix of the problem at that time, so that as we look at home inspections, I mean, I just really feel like we need to be responsible for the units for which we're responsible and not wait until it comes time to sell it and then suddenly discover that the person's going to go upside down or the new seller can't possibly afford the improvements or all of the things that could happen if things are rated to such an extent over time. So that would just be something I'd like to recommend that we talk about is, can we do home inspections along the way so we don't end up with these situations that we're ending up with?
Francie, just to make sure I understand what you're recommending is, in an ideal world, we would require some type of periodic inspection, and that would be part of a deed restriction or part of an APCHA regulation.
Yes. I'm thinking it would be great if we could discuss that, because
if that could be required. The other potential, and staff kind of brought that to the table and then pulled it off, was we did initially in the straw man proposal have an element that was addressing people who wanted to do an inspection now and do the capital improvements now. The only reason I pulled that off the table was I realized this is already complex, right? If we just solve this initially for people who are selling, then it will be easier to go back and revisit either voluntary inspections or required biennial or some periodic inspections. So it was specifically because of the complexity. That being said, if the board wants to bring that back to the table as part of this discussion, absolutely can do that.
Yep.
Well, you know, I don't want to postpone making some changes that are more timely that we need to make for people who are trying to sell immediately. But in order to prohibit this from happening more in the future, I think it would be a worthwhile discussion. I don't know whether you want to put it off until after this particular discussion, but I don't think that voluntary, I feel strongly that if you're in an APCHA house or apartment, you need to have your unit inspected by either APCHA inspectors, whoever we decide is going to do the inspections. I feel pretty strongly that should not be optional. So just putting it out there for the board to think about.
And Francie, for the purposes of this discussion, I think the board should weigh in on that now, because we'll lose that if we don't have folks weigh in on it now. And I'll tell you, I did mention to Cindy and Bethany that I very much believe, because when we start to see some of the elements of this program, even if we don't require other inspections or offer voluntary inspections to people who aren't selling, I think we need to come back. Once we get the program in place, we need to come back quickly and do that. So either way, so I will put the question to the board. Does the board want to add to the discussion now mandatory inspections on a periodic basis? Sorry, Kelly.
I'm not sure I'm comfortable going that far just yet. you know, I do think that's a departure from how APCHA has operated for 40 years, where, you know, it's different than a rental where the management of your rental can come in to inspect it. Like, that's not what people agreed to when they purchased from APCHA, and I do think that that is a bit of a departure. I will say that I think that, you know, if you are maybe taking out another loan or something against your unit, or perhaps refinancing, that we would make that inspection available, home equity loan to maybe do some of these repairs, to do some of your maintenance, that would be a time that APCHA would offer the inspection to you. And that's where I would be most comfortable, I think, starting. And I think that, to me, is pretty straightforward. If you're using your APCHA house as like some sort of collateral, then you're implicating APCHA in sort of that collateral. So an inspection would be appropriate. You know, I think, I do think that the proposal that you've highlighted does balance out, you know, the seller's participation in the program over time with the buyers and future buyers' ability to get a good unit in good status without increasing the cost of that unit over time due to all these repairs. But I just want to say too, I think that, you know, there's people that want to maintain their unit but can't for a variety of reasons, or it's not easy to for a variety of reasons. And so, you know, I think that there is some continued discussion about our program opportunities to help make that easier for people too. And I don't want to, you know, I want to have that conversation, not necessarily parallel with this one, but in the future about, you know, what can we do as a program to help make it easier? Because it's not always easy. You can't even get anyone to come fix your sink sometimes in an APCHA unit, you know, and I think that there's ways that we can address maybe getting around that, whether we have APCHA, you know, property managers help with that, whether we get contractors on retainer to help with that. You know, those are ideas I want us to pursue, because it can be really hard, I think, just to functionally keep your unit up in our community when we have such disparities in cost and wealth and access for the resources to do it. So, you know, so I do think that the seller, it's their responsibility sort of ultimately to, you know, at the end of their useful life of that unit, take responsibility for the status that it's in and the quality that it's in or isn't in, and don't necessarily put all of that on future buyers or on a program, which is then going to become more and more expensive over time. So I appreciate how you've tried to strike the balance here. I'm not totally clear on what APCHA's role is. If now APCHA is suddenly, you know, if in all conditions APCHA is standing in as the primary seller and dealing with this so that money can go into escrow for repairs, or if APCHA becomes a primary seller or a primary buyer, only in situations where, you know, the inspection shows that that the unit's not up to snuff for life safety issues. So that's an outstanding question for me, because I don't see how APCHA has the resources, even if they're revolving resources, to step in for every sale and be the initial buyer before, you know, passing it through to the next buyer. So maybe I'm confused about that. I could use some clarity.
Yeah, no, and Kelly, on that last piece, you're absolutely correct. There are a lot of logistics around this program, even around the home inspections, as we really started to get into what would it be. Even staff, right, we changed our minds or shifted how we thought this would work. So what I'm trying to go from, like, high level concept, yes, we want a capital improvement plan, to let's break out the pieces. So for example, we absolutely need to revisit the discussion, and there was good feedback in the survey on who does the fixing. And it was surprising the amount of support there was for creating some type of staff who could be contracted with or who could do this at a lower cost. So that is definitely a piece that needs to happen. As you pointed out, the actual mechanics and some more of the detail behind this would need to be worked out. And then what I heard on the mandatory periodic inspections was not a mandatory piece yet. However, it may be that there's a trigger event that would happen, such as a loan or some type of other piece. And I also believe I heard a support for, yes, we'll want some type of voluntary inspection and improvement program to run parallel with it. Is that, okay, great.
Yeah, that captured my thoughts. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Carson, please.
Yeah, so I am in agreement with Kelly. I mean, I don't think the mandatory, I don't think the mandatory inspections is, I don't think that's something that people have signed up for. I don't think that's anything we want to tackle right now. That would be adding complexity to an already very complex problem, in the sense that you would then have a lot of problems and need funding for how to solve all of that. So in agreement with Kelly on that. Also in agreement on creating some sort of I don't know if it's staff position or positions that could contract out to homeowners or HOAs to, provide basically sort of free labor. If maybe they bought the materials and then the APCHA property maintenance or whoever, or even if it was at a reduced cost or whatever, but just to provide something where you can get somebody to come fix your sink, or just to provide those options. But I think one of the things that I would maybe add that I sort of see as potentially low-hanging fruit is, if I know for a fact there are people that live in units that have hit their 10% cap, and the unit's 30 years old, and the windows are in they're 30-year-old windows that weren't designed to be they're 30-year-old windows, right? I mean, that's so, or 40, and there's people that are willing to spend the money and they're willing to do that repair, which that obviously is valuable to APCHA and to the property. And so to me, I think that's something that's worth exploring, of how do we do that? If somebody's willing to put the money in, and then we can depreciate it from now until they move out. We can depreciate the use until they move out. It's not costing APCHA anything, and if we can stay within the maximum sales price of the unit, I think that's low-hanging fruit because it doesn't require any funding from APCHA. The homeowner is willing to manage it and take that on. To me, I think that's something we should be considering. Thank you.
And thank you, Carson. And per the last meeting, that is something that staff is working on. So the intent with the deed restriction that the board said, yes, go forth and work on that, was specifically what you said, is to take those, in particular, the properties that are really old and where like they've maxed out their capital improvements, and also they don't necessarily have any allocation for energy efficiency.
Sure.
Is to entice those with that type of deed restriction. And what APCHA gets out of it is that some of those deed restrictions, particularly the really old ones, like in a 40-year-old house, do not require the homeowner, does not require compliance with APCHA regulations as updated from time to time. And we do want to add that language in. So there's a little bit of give and take there. Ultimately, I think it benefits the property owners, and the ultimate, it benefits the program because we get an updated property.
Great. Well, sorry, I just misunderstood something you said earlier. I thought you said we had taken that off the table to remove complexity. So perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. The piece that I pulled off the table was specifically creating an optional program for current homeowners to do a voluntary inspection and then update their house, right? It was the inspection part, to offer that as a voluntary piece. The focus, by giving it focus on just at the point of sale, that just simplified some things, because we would have had to basically create two parallel programs at the same time.
Okay, so yeah, so that is what I'm talking about, is if you've got somebody that wants to do it now and they're not moving out. To me, I see that as potentially an easy solution that it benefits APCHA and benefits the homeowner. I agree with you. It is an additional layer of complexity, but as I said, APCHA is not funding it, and the homeowner is managing the project now. And if it's something that is going to save the homeowner, APCHA, someone money down the road, I mean, if they're doing some of the things, like I said, I mean, certainly not general maintenance items, but if it's big projects that are going to extend the life of the project, and like I said, APCHA is not paying for it, the homeowner wants it now and is willing to manage it and pay for it, I mean, I see that as low-hanging fruit.
Okay.
If we can give them some increase in price, again, not going over the max sales price, you know, keeping the units affordable, and then depreciating. You know, so if it's a window, and we already have a schedule for that. So if you do windows, we depreciate those at, you know, X% per year, and you know, so basically giving them that value and then depreciating down as they continue to live in that unit. Just that's my thought.
And Carson, you've just provided a reason that when we bring that updated deed restriction back, that it makes sense to have that optional program, right? Because we need that incentive, and it's going to be needed for those people who have maxed out.
Right.
So having that bringing back that voluntary program makes sense. You've asked at length that a voluntary inspection program there won't be a mad rush for it. So maybe I don't have to worry about funding, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think there will be some people who will want to do it. I mean, and if that number it could be very limited as well, right? You could say it's only for these specific items, and just make it very, you know, just to keep it from being too unwieldy. Just say it's only for these specific items, and just trying to keep it maybe a little bit more simple.
And I do think we would limit it to that list that we provided last week or 2 weeks ago. Right. To the capital improvements, although we may throw in carpet just as one of those that it's worth it to get it updated. I know Francie and Kelly have hands raised. I wasn't sure who was first. And Skippy has a hand raised because he can't raise a hand.
I just wanted to ask Carson for some clarification on something he said, if that's okay.
Please.
When you said that if we did a mandatory inspection at some point in the near future, obviously not right away, but you said it would uncover problems that we're not ready to address, and I was wondering what you meant by that. Did you mean physical problems in the dwellings, or just more of administrative and relationship with the owners kind of problems?
No, well, I mean, I think if you, we're talking about roughly 1,600 units, and I think if we start going in and inspecting 1,500 or 1,600 units with the, you know, and identifying problems, capital reserve problems, there's going to be, I would say, majority of people aren't going to be able to afford to do those improvements that we identify. And so, okay, we've identified the problem, now what? Mm-hmm. And so if we've got somebody's got a cracked foundation, that can be very expensive. Who's going to pay for a cracked foundation?
Right. Okay, that's what I thought you meant. But yeah. I guess the reason I brought this up, and I've been thinking about this a lot since it first came up like a month ago about the inspections, maybe more than a month. So if we don't do it before it comes to sale, then we have this backlog that's building up. It just seems to me that way. And so, I mean, obviously it's not something we start right away, but I understand what you're saying, and I get the complexity of it and possibly the expense of it and too much at one time to deal with. But I do think that perhaps some proactive work, preliminary work, might solve some of these problems. But anyway, thank you for clarifying.
And I think your point, right? I mean, I think, and that's why I think that the voluntary aspect. I mean, if you've got people who are saying, "Hey, I have a problem that I need help with," and they are willing to allow an inspector to come in, and there's some resources for funding, and you can sort of start with the ones where maybe, I mean, you would think that the people who would sort of self-identify for that voluntary program are going to be the ones who recognize that there's some issues that need to be addressed, rather than just saying it's everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Carson.
Yeah. Sorry.
Sorry, go ahead, Kelly.
Yeah, thanks. I'll just jump in here. I think the analogy Rachel said last meeting was a really good one in terms of like looking at open space and trails programs. Like we had all this money where we can buy all this land, buy all this resource, and then over time the budget has to shift a little bit to like maintaining that resource. Our inventory with how old it is, I do think we as a board need to start talking about, or all of us involved in housing programs need to start talking about, do we need to have a budgetary shift about maintenance of our assets? And that conversation would help tee up, like, how do we help owners who want to do stuff? How do we address the backlog in maintenance and disrepair, which we don't have any resources allocated to doing right now. But I think that the question we're having right now starts to beg a future question of how do we start to identify and shift and allocate resources for that? And I've mentioned, state funding, I think is available to pull down for it. So I think we have to keep that in our minds for this next phase of this housing inventory that we all want to continue to support. I do have a question, Carson, which is more of like an immediate, answer in incentivizing how owners might do the maintenance and repairs on their own. And I'm not sure if I understand what you said or if I understand how the program is functioning now, but it seems like if an owner is put in repair and that has depreciated back down to zero, that we should look at allowing, maybe another 10%, accrual for the next round of repairs, and maybe revisit that every time it depreciates back down to zero. Because what I think I heard you say, Carson, is that there's people who, in their first 10 or 15 years in a unit, they got that 10% appreciation cap, and since then haven't really put more money in because there's no further benefit. But what if we allow, access to additional appreciation after, their initial repairs have depreciated all the way down to zero or something like that? So I guess I need some clarification on what your thought was.
That's a great question, and I would actually ask staff to jump in there because I have to be totally transparent, I'm not sure exactly how that would work right now anyway.
Yeah,
but,
and I can,
Diane, we do depreciate, if you do capital improvements, we do depreciate them, correct?
Yes. We do, and my suggestion would be that this particular piece of the conversation be had when staff brings back an updated deed restriction, right? Because that's where that would live. And asking that question of, hey, if let's say a furnace has depreciated and the ASHRAE standard for that furnace says that they should be updating it because they've owned it for that long, should they be able to basically restart that? That's a great question. Yeah. I think that probably lives in that conversation. And the two reasons I'm saying that is, one is I think it that is where it lives also. I don't want to get too far off of this who pays question because it is such a difficult question. And Kelly, I would say, we definitely, and I think I've heard you say this, we don't have the resources at APCHA to pursue funding. But if you know of funding, please do let me know. At the city, we've got somebody who's not doing grant requests, but at least is point on coordination. And if you think there's funding available now, I mean, we could, if we could find funding, we could set up a program right, tomorrow to figure out how to get funding to folks for capital improvements that could be exclusive of this program. Thanks. Skippy, you had a question, or you had input.
Yeah, if you could go back to the 3 questions slide, I will, at your request, I'm going to do my best to answer these questions clearly, succinctly, tie in everyone else's comments, which I think I have noted here as a basis for moving forward, and then invite anyone to rip those thought apart or offer differing ones. So the first one is no, I do not want to pause this conversation. It's a difficult conversation. It's been a difficult conversation. It will be a difficult conversation. There's no time like the present, and one more unit being handed over in an unsafe or unlivable condition is too many. So I think we have a responsibility to act now and recognize there is not a perfect solution to this that everyone will be happy with, but a solution that is substantially better and prevents units handed over in poor condition is a good one, and there'll be opportunities to improve on it in the future. So no, we shouldn't pause. We should move forward on it now. Do we need outside money? Need? No. Want? Yes. I think that ultimately the sort of comprehensive solution that I envision and is in here in this packet is one where, in almost all cases, the seller pays. Because what we're looking for is who's responsible for this condition, right? And so what I would imagine is a situation where, let's say the max appreciable value of a unit that is being sold is $300,000, just to say. We go in, we do the inspection, and it turns out that it's going to be about $25,000 to redo that. We would sell that unit to the buyer for that $300,000. We would allow the individual seller to capture the total minus the cost of improvement, so in this case, $275,000, and then APCHA would have the $25,000 on hand to actually go ahead and do that work. So I do imagine us as the pass-through, where we're purchasing it, doing the work ourselves, and then passing it along. And while we don't need regular annual funding for that, we do need some form of piggy bank to start that, and that money can recycle, right? So I do think we need that. And I think that the benefit of APCHA playing that role is several-fold, and it's systemic as well. One, we have control over what happens. We have control over quality. Two, we avoid the inevitable problem of buyers or sellers not having additional funds on either end to make that thing possible. So we ensure that these changes can happen and people aren't locked in or locked out of the system. But then to everything Carson and Rachel offline here and Francie and Kelly have said, there are structural inequities that weren't considered when we started the system. And we're asking people to buy units for reduced prices, but whether they're category 1 or 5, the maintenance and upkeep is the same as the free market. And it's just not realistic. So if we become the central source for addressing these turnover problems, we create enough business that we can either create an in-house or a contracted division and bring down those costs. I don't think we should be doing it pro bono, but if we can do it at cost or at least a reduced cost, then we have an architecture by which to long-term, not immediately, long-term address those systemic inequities, and at least in the moment, turn these units over in a livable way, faster and better. But we need a pot of money to do that. which obviously leads me back to the last thing, which I think the seller should pay. The one, I think, area that's sticky there that's worth consideration is if the seller has only recently purchased the unit. Because what we're assuming is if you've owned it for a long time, you're responsible for lack of upkeep. But if you've purchased it in, say, the last 5 or 10 years, you may have purchased someone else's problem. And is it really fair then for you to take on the full burden of someone else? And should we consider some sort of, cost sharing between buyer and seller in that scenario? I think that's worth consideration. But I think that answers the 3 questions concisely. And Carson, I love your idea. I support it. I think this solution will provide that architecture for that to happen in the future. And Francie, I love where you're going, but with the rest of the group, I think that if we have this group there that could in the future make these changes, just having the inspection as voluntary rather than required should be sufficient for any smart homeowner who knows down the road this is going to hit them to press the yes or opt-in button on a voluntary inspection, and then when it becomes available, also leveraging our sort of in-house or contracted labor force to do that at a more affordable rate. I think that would capture not all, but a lot without having to go straight to a mandate that we're just not ready to address. And the last part is, where does that funding come from? Kelly, I hope you have ideas you can share. I hope that there's banks that might be interested in some agreement. I know that some local banks have affordable housing as one of their pillars of community give back. So they're in a section where there's a pool of money where they're looking to support these things without a return. I've heard that directly from them. So maybe there's an option there. But the third is, I'm happy to take that request to City Council. There's no one who's more gung-ho on creation of new units than me. But we are simply, let's use a housing metaphor. If the roof is leaking, you have to fix the roof before you replace the couch underneath the leak if you're a responsible owner. And we've got some leaky roofs. And if that means foregoing immediate creation of new units to do so and regain the trust and accountability in the system we've all set out to do, I think that's money well spent, and I'm happy to take a request forwards. So starting position, not declarative statements, but I think that could give us an architecture to send staff forward on, and that's my suggestion.
Thank you, Skippy, for that. And Kelly, I'm going to come to you in just a minute. Skippy, just because you brought up the funding piece, just a reminder that our finance operations works as a department of the city, so we are coming into budget season. If you think we're going to have staffing needs and or other budget requests, we're going to want to get to those super soon. Possible areas where we would want to have staff would be a coordinator who's working with inspectors on estimating. If you wanted either a staff person who coordinates capital improvements, like we have a set of contractors, a pool of contractors we've set up, or a third piece would be creating a pool of staff positions that would do improvements. And then the third piece would be a funding request kind of to act as seed capital for this. So just keep in mind, those of you who are liaisons to your elected councils. Also, right before I get to Kelly, David, I just wanted a heads up that I'm going to come back to you because still waters run deep, and I want to make sure I get your input on this. Yeah. So, Kelly, please.
Diane, just to close loop there, just know I hear all 3 of those as individuals, and if the board is supportive of that type of direction, I'm happy to take any of those back with more specificity when we have it. And I did talk to Rachel before this meeting. These structural inequities are important to her. She has already approached me about needing to potentially reallocate funds to patch the roof before the new couch. I don't know why I like this analogy. So I do think, I can't say declaratively, but I do think there's alignment there for the board to know about taking such a request back.
Great, thank you. Kelly, please.
Yeah, I guess this is a minor point, but, you know, one of the advantages of allowing the seller some accrual of appreciation, despite having to take, you know, the cost of life safety improvements off of their purchase price, is that they may be, you know, absorbing problems that they inherited, right, from previous owners. But I do wonder if there is a carve out here, if you have been the only owner of a unit, you know, whether that appreciation is still due to them. So just something to consider, because I do think we need to keep in mind, you know, the expense of units over time, as these appreciations get added up, even if maybe the seller didn't do work that they should do. A minor point.
I'm especially glad you brought that up for two reasons. One is that I call this the first seller problem, right? Is that I think there is a disproportionate burden on the next person or the first person who sells the property after this is implemented, right? And it is disproportionate because if they inherited something, whether they bought it a year ago, 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, it is an inherited problem. And that is likely to go away or be reduced. It will probably go away as an issue after that first sale. And that first sale may happen in the next year, in the next 5 years, in the next 20 years, but still that will exist. And the board may want to look at a special provision to address the first seller problem. And if there were any opportunity for outside funding, that's where I would say apply it. And it may take, you know, it could be a really difficult, like deciding what gets funded and what doesn't, but creating some type of fund for that would be huge. And I think if we don't continue to pay attention to that, I don't think the board will necessarily get to an answer. Thank you. Francie, I want to be where you are in the sunshine.
In spite of the shadows and everything I'm dealing with?
In spite of the shadows, yep, exactly.
Pretty nice out here.
Yeah, that's awesome. David, can we go to you? Thoughts, input, or pass, any of those?
Obviously, an awful lot. There's a lot of ideas that are being thrown around here. I think I don't have anything specific to add. I'm just trying to take it all in. This is not we're not going to come up with any answers today. It's still going to be a discussion that's going to take some while. But I think somehow I would agree that if the owner has not taken care of their unit, there should be some way that the buyer is not stuck with whatever has to be done. I think that's the bottom line that we need to come up with, and I'm just listening to all of the ideas that are flying at this point. I don't hear anything.
Diana, you're muted.
Diane. Oh, but it was so good. I just gave you the answer. But that. David, your perspective on that the seller has some level of responsibility. That's been borne out both in this discussion, but also in the full board survey. So critical point. Looking at the time, I want to wrap up in the next kind of 6 minutes. My challenge right now is how to move forward on the who pays. and how to get consensus on that. Right? There's definitely I mean, I definitely got a lot out of this conversation. I will most definitely put back in the optional program where someone can do an inspection voluntarily, and as if they, particularly if they want to use the new deed restriction, or if they don't, they could do capital improvements before they sell. I will add that piece back in. That is one clear takeaway, but I am still struggling a little bit with how to move forward the discussion on who pays. Thank you.
Diane, can I jump back in?
Please do. Thank you.
Just so we have something to discuss, my suggestion here is that the seller pays, that they don't necessarily pay out of pocket or will never sell units. We'll need some funds to do that, but ultimately it will come out of what they can capture from the sale. And that if there is a carve out, it would be for people who have very recently purchased and have inherited that problem from somewhere else. So maybe a way to do this is like, does anyone, strongly disagree with that, or can that be a place for staff to move forward from, and they'll bring us back options and thoughts?
I definitely have to agree with Skippy on that particular point. As an owner, I just can't even imagine trying to sell my home to someone and it's in terrible condition, that I've just let it go, and now I want to reap the full benefit of the sale price. I just don't think anyone who does that doesn't deserve to be in employee housing in my mind. That's just not right. That's just not the way anyone should live, or try and pass things on to someone else. So I really like that solution of you sell the place, you get your full max, but whatever the cost of bringing it up to standards for the next guy should come out of your pocket if you've never done it during the 20 or 30 years you've lived there.
So I have heard at least two of you express some support for some variation of option C. Is that, I got a head nod from Kelly. And Francie, this is the one where it's, we never go below the sales price plus some appreciation for the seller, but the improvements will come out of they won't get maximum sales price.
Right.
From that.
Yeah, I get that. Isn't that where we're headed? Isn't that the point of all of these discussions, is that we're trying to get to where, and that's the whole point of having inspections at sale, is we're trying to get to where the buyer has exhibited due diligence and the seller has to take responsibility for the capital improvements, and that we get rid of this inherited problem situation. Isn't that where we're headed?
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And in fact, Francie, I think I could even go so far to say is if we were able to solve the first buyer problem, right? And I'm just calling it that, but we call it the first seller problem, right? If you're the first seller, so Cindy, Bethany, and I talked to a APCHA owner, owned it for a long time. When she bought it, the floor wasn't level. Should she have to make the floor level? Like, is that part of that? And that's a 20-year inherited from 20 years ago. So if we were able to solve the first seller problem, that then holding sellers accountable would be easier, recognizing that what Rachel talked about, that improvements are always free market cost, even though the unit is subsidized to buy. And that's where then we get into, is there a way to create a subsidized way to do improvements?
Yeah, I get that. I love that idea of having.
And that's what I heard Kelly give a lot of support for us too. I heard Skippy express some of that, and I believe Carson.
Yes.
Okay. I think I've got enough to move forward. I'll tell you, I think we're still going to get stuck on this first seller piece, but it is a discussion that you are moving the ball forward, and I very much appreciate that. And there's a lot of good feedback tonight. Thank you.
Diane, could you just summarize in your 3-question format what you heard so we can all nod our heads in agreement and make sure we're aligned?
Is this a quiz? I was told there would be no math.
I just want to make sure that in the future we don't get hung up on things that we might be hung up on now, and I think we have good alignment here, so I just want to make it explicit.
Yes. The answer to number 1 is no. The board wants to keep working on this, and recognizing that we may not have perfect information, but it's still, we need to keep moving forward. That the answer to number 2 is that everyone would like outside money, other people's money, if possible. However, we need to figure out, we need to at least explore, can this be done without exogenous funding? And number 3 is the same answer to number 1, and that one really asked, is there more information you need? And I think at this point the board just said, nope, we want to keep working on this.
Does anyone have any amendments to what they just heard? Does that sound basically right to everybody?
Yeah.
I thought that the answer to number 1 was yes. And you said it was no, right, Diane?
Sorry, I changed the question. You are correct. The answer is who paid, yes, the answer is yes.
Okay.
I was saying no, don't pause.
Right.
So
right. Okay.
you are, thank you for that correction.
Right.
And I'll give a number 4 that the board provided some really good reasoning for why to bring back the optional home inspection. We need to add that back in. And I think we can do that without a lot of complexity.
Yeah, and then the only liner note I would add, I would suggest and ask if others disagree, is just, I think what you said about number 2 is right. We have to plan for both eventualities, for not having it and having it. That's the only smart way to do it. But I would hope that we would put forth a plan that we think is the best plan first, and then have an exit strategy if we can't get money for it, but not put forth a suboptimum plan because we might not get the money. Like, let's really aim for what we need and then adapt if we can't get it.
Skippy, my main concern, I like that approach conceptually. My primary concern is that if we thought there was a really good chance of a bunch of outside money, every person here would say, absolutely, we should do that, and we should use it to solve the first seller problem. Focus on that one.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I can't speak for anyone else. I speaking for myself, I'm not interested in money to solve the first, like to bail out a quote unquote generation or like an iteration of owners. I would not be interested in that. What I am interested in is a systemic intervention with rotating funds that not only provides a bridge to get units moving and solve it through the work, but then also creates a market to answer all these other questions and suggestions the board has brought up around maintenance, around improvements, around structural inequity. And so that's like a big down payment on a systemic change that I think makes a ton of sense, and a lot more sense than writing checks to get people out of a problem they caused.
Yeah, and Skippy, I guess I should clarify what my recommendation would be is if you had outside money, and I think you're right on a revolving loan fund, that should be a component. But to address the first seller problem without inflating the cost of the properties. So you could hold the seller responsible to a degree, right? So it could be option C where you put a floor on it, and then any above, instead of putting that into the sales price and basically putting it on the buyer as Carson said, possibly inflating it out of a category. You use that external funding to take care of what might be bigger problems in that first seller situation.
Understood. That makes sense. Totally agree. Got you. Thank you for that. Thank you for letting me.
Cool. I have eaten up some of your time. Thank you for that discussion. Can we have 6 people at the next meeting? This is super easy.
Okay.
Sorry,
thank you.
Very nimble conversation. Thank you. I'll hand it back to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Diane. Super well moderated, and that feels like some real progress and something that's been sticky. So, like, yeah, claps all around. We have optional board of directors comments at this point. I just see Diane's screen, so just raise your hand if you have anything you want to share with us and the community. All right, I'm not seeing any. I'll
just jump in.
Didn't see it.
I just want to understand, because we gave feedback at the last meeting to city planners regarding the rezoning request. Ben Anderson and Chris Benden came and presented to us, and our board sort of didn't take a formal vote or resolution, but supported the effort of rezoning, recognizing that it wouldn't necessarily lead to the immediate delivery of affordable housing, multifamilies on those properties. But I just want to check in because I think we thought maybe there would be an option to do something formal or to formally make that comment, but is that off the table, Skippy? Like, is that proposal died completely?
It did die completely, and had that passed, it would have then gone into first, second reading process, or there would have been opportunity.
Yeah.
Council was not interested in looking at that by unanimous decision, and I'm happy to share some of the collective reasoning if that's interesting, but it won't be moving forward.
Okay, well, you and I can talk offline, because it does sound like there wasn't like any advocacy in favor, like that drummed up just the need for housing, the need to create conditions for delivery of more housing, which is disappointing because we know we need it. So we can talk offline. So thanks for that update.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else? Okay. I just wanted to put one thing in your guys' minds. We don't need to talk about this right now, but before I realized that you guys had voted to extend our meetings to 3 hours, I was going to come to you guys and just say, hey, we're going to need more meeting time. So I guess you guys have already accepted that. I have this regular concern that meetings end up being 2 hours, then 3, then 5, and the science of the human brain just says that after a certain amount of time, we make worse decisions, right? That's not a personal failure. It's just the reality of attention spans, focus, exhaustion, et cetera. Hopefully this 3 hours will provide what we need, but it may not. We may need more. So I just want you guys to keep in your mind's eye, are we really accomplishing what you think we should, what the community needs? And if not, in the future, we should just be thinking about, do we need to meet more often? Do we need to meet differently? And then, of course, there's all the concerns around staff and everything else. But I just want that to be in our mind frame, because it's been a concern of mine, and one that obviously you guys all validated with this vote. So that's all I wanted to offer. And thank you.
Skippy, two additions to that. One is just want to extend a thanks to Cindy and Bethany and Maddie for facilitating this meeting 3 hours. I will tell you, if you ever go back to 2, it's just better for staff to start at 4, with everything from kids to just, Cindy starts at 7, I start at 8, and it's a long day. Yeah. The other piece I did want to mention, though, is, and we did this while you're away, so we'll talk more with you about it, but for this meeting, we actually specifically decided, hey, we need to keep making progress on the regulations, and at the same time, I don't think we were, I know I wasn't as intentional, but I will be in the future. I think if we had made this like a 2.5 hour discussion just on who pays, we'd all be fried at this point. But I think if we can keep it to moving multiple things forward and keeping the conversation length manageable, that may be better. And I'm absolutely looking for feedback on that as we move forward, kind of how that's working for folks. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the background. And I'm not suggesting any changes at this time. We'll observe this, just bringing it into the consciousness. And I appreciate that. And I think in the time that we had allotted, this is not stasis, right? Like you have some real board direction on how to go forth and bring this back and keep it moving and towards being adopted. So unless anyone else has anything, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
There's an echo. Staff, would you read the roll?
Carson?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Skippy?
Yays.
Kelly?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a good night.
Hey, guys.
Thanks. Bye.
Ciao.